I'm going to ambitiously take you back to the time of my birth in a few short minutes and tell you a little bit about who I am, what we do, and why I'm here. I grew up in the city of Denver, fourth generation Colorado native. In the hot summer of 1963, I was just 9 months old, my mother took my brother and I to Washington, D.C., answering the call of Dr. King. And I'm assuming she thought that the closer we were, the more it might sink in. And she knew that her boys were too young to remember all that was said that day. But she believed that the history that we witnessed that day would always be part of the men who we would become one day. Decades later, I had the privilege to take my grandfather on another journey, on the opposite side of the National Mall to celebrate President Obama's first inauguration. And as you all remember, it was a cold day, and as my grandfather and I shivered together that morning, he kept the two of us warm by telling me stories about his time as a young man living in Washington, D.C. and working in the United States Senate Lounge, where he checked hats and coats and poured coffee and tea for the senator and their guests, for senators and their guests. As a matter of fact, he told me he managed to sneak a peek out the window on the day of President Roosevelt's swearing in. And he said, "You know, grandson, out of all those people, I didn't see a single black face in that wide sea of people." Frankly, the grand sweep of history was not lost on either of us. That my grandfather could return to the Capitol after all those years, not as a coat check, but as a personal guest of the great line of the Senate, Ted Kennedy, for the ascension of our first African-American president. Now, as we all know, there's an obvious sentiment to this night, the final CBC Foundation dinner we will share with President Obama during his presidency. This is indeed to celebrate, but let's not choose to make this night about the past and about what we've already accomplished. Even though the president's term is coming to an end, the distinguished members of Congress here tonight aren't going anywhere. And there continue to be more steps to climb up that mountaintop, and the path has become steeper and more slick and prone to backsliding, and we must support each other more resolutely as we sit together. Frankly, I'm here tonight because of what you in this room have done for me and for us. Your voices, John Lewis, Elijah Cummings, Charles Raymond, and so many others, past and present, have been our conscience and our hope and our reminder of the dignity and potential of public service. The late great Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, who hails from my current hometown of Austin, Texas, once said, "What the people want is very simple. They want an America as good as its promise. Do not call for black power or green power, call for brain power." For the first time in history, wealth can be created without having massive amounts of capital handed down, the ownership of people or land or natural resources. For the first time in history, wealth can be created through the power of one's mind, thoughts and ideas. And it can be developed and monetized and distributed instantly across the globe. Intellectual property has now become the new currency of business. The promise of brain power to move individuals and families and communities from poverty to prosperity has never been closer and within our grasp. Despite this progress, too many of our communities are being left behind. But I, for one, refuse to accept this. Now more than ever, the power to move individuals and families out of poverty into the mainstream of our economy is within our reach. This is our defining moment, and it's a defining moment for our community. But it takes all of us, business people like me, educators, legislators like you, and community leaders like you to unleash the minds of our young people. Just last month when I was in Baltimore, I was with some young adults at the Empower program. Some are homeless, some are veterans, all empowered by the technical skills training and the 3D printer we just delivered, so they can imagine a brighter future and make it and grab it for their own. We need to have their back, because one thing I know firsthand is this: if we find new ways to unlock those long shut gates for the young men and women in our communities, they will perform. I see it happen constantly. If we do this locally, we can change our neighborhoods. If we do it at scale, we can change our nation. As many of you know, 1 week from today, we'll be gathering again for the opening of the National Museum of African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian. The brilliant architect of this museum, David Adjaye, described the African American story as an extraordinary journey of overcoming and shaping what America is. If my story, if our president's story, and your stories, and if us being here tonight tells us anything, it's that the arc of the moral universe, as Dr. King described it, does indeed bend towards justice, but it doesn't happen by natural law or gravitational law.
Impressive.
It's not a given, and it's not a guarantee. It happens because leaders like you put your shoulder to it, you don't let up, and you go after it each and every day. And for this, I thank you.